It's okay to admit we just don't know everything. I'm going to show you what it's like to be an independent scholar in 2026. Hi, if you're new, my name is Madeline Firestein. I'm a historian and criminologist who studies the history of crime, warfare, and their impact on American society. In this vlog series, Field Notes of an Independent Researcher, I take a look at what it's like for me to do research outside of being tied to a university or institution. I run my own LLC, Rooted in Place, where I provide educational materials and historical consulting. After several years of working in the field of public history and research, I decided to strike out on my own, but it's been kind of an isolated and lonely experience. No one teaches you really how to be an independent researcher, which is why I'm really grateful for my friends at the Accepted Society, who I can study with on Zoom and in person. Another way I beat the loneliness and get motivated is getting out of my house and out of my head. One of the places I enjoy spending a lot of time is actually my alma mater. Even though I love spending time in my home office, there's nothing like getting out of the house and being among studious and motivated individuals. Plus, a hot chai tea latte always does the trick. I'm continuing a project I'm working on for a museum in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where I'm documenting the soldiers who fought at the Battle of Gettysburg and how many of them came to my town of Alexandria, Virginia, for treatment, imprisonment, or to be mustered out of military service. And you're probably wondering, why? Why would I research this? Mainly because I have done a lot of research into my town, the Civil War history of my town, the hospitals there, the prisons, like the daily experiences under martial law, the daily experiences being under control of the Union Army. So I can go into a lot more detail about that if anyone's interested. But of course, the Battle of Gettysburg is a super critical encounter and super critical event, one of the turning points of the war. So what I figured I would do in this vlog is show you kind of how I do my research. I'm going to show you what it's like to be an independent scholar in 2026. And you also may be asking yourself, well, Madeline, how can I get projects like this? How can I do cool research like the Gettysburg thing you're doing? And to be honest, I just cold emailed, right? I had emailed them asking, hey, I'm interested in collaborating. Here's what I can do. And I've told them I can present this as like a lecture. I can present it as like a written report. It can be an exhibit. And so they were very interested because obviously it connects very much to the work they do at this museum. And so you never know what's going to happen if you don't just reach out and see for yourself who wants what. And if you don't reach out at all, you're kind of assigning yourself a rejection, right? So cold emails, of course, be specific, and be direct as to what the end result would be. So now with this research, of course, I have to focus first on the hard evidence, right? The actual data of who fought in the battle and then who was brought down to Alexandria. And so I've been using a very famous military data website called Fold3, which extracts a lot of information from Ancestry.com, and people can link profiles with soldiers. And I like it because it's very user-friendly. Because if you go on Ancestry.com, you're met with just the record itself, and you may not be able to understand what the record's saying, what the record means. And so people on Fold3 will create a profile for soldiers. Now, it's not automatic. You have to manually create a soldier profile. So there are some people who are not listed on Fold3, and it's quite sad. But they categorize it by when they enlisted, where they were injured, where they were imprisoned, where they were discharged from the military, if they got a medal, right? So it kind of has options for you to section it off. And so I've been using Fold3. And let me show you exactly what that looks like on my screen. So let me show you exactly how I'm doing this research on the Gettysburg to Alexandria connection. So on Fold3, you get to look at a whole bunch of different wars, right? From the first wars that American soldiers fought in, all the way to modern day, and even have some demographics, which is awesome to have. We're focused on the Civil War right now. Now, first we're going to type in Gettysburg, because that's the first location. And again, you can have it by place. I'm choosing keywords because some profiles have it listed as a description of service. So it may not be a location. And then we're going to type in Alexandria just for that same reason. All right. Now, you have records and people, right? I prefer just to narrow it down down here by service person, by memorial, because I'm counting the number of soldiers, right? I'm counting individual soldiers. So we got about 480. Now, this is, of course, not all of the soldiers who fought in Gettysburg who have some association with Alexandria. Of course, there are more than 480 who were treated there for injuries, sickness, imprisonment, or were discharged, or even are from there. Now, the problem with putting our locations as keywords is it comes up with a whole bunch of stuff. Like, we have someone's name, right? Alexandria Crypt. That's not what we want. So we're going to move down to the next guy, and I'll show you an example of what it looks like. So we have William M. Violet. Now, he's a Confederate soldier, and right off the bat, they kind of tell you already what regiment they're from, what company they're in. Now, most soldiers will transfer to some other company or regiment at some point, so keep an eye out for the transfers and make sure you have the right company, and I'll show you that in a second. So you can see here that the categorization I was talking about, right? They categorize it by enlistment. Now what's cool is we already have right off the bat that Alexandria connection. This guy actually was from Alexandria, okay? Pretty cool. And we're gonna look at how we can check this information in a second. Also get a preview of his military service. He got a medal. He was a prisoner of war. He's not wounded, right? All right, now here's the transfer dates. Okay, this is usually when they transfer to a different regiment, company, or they're in prison. There's a whole bunch of reasons for this, and we can check that in a later date. So here's the Gettysburg connection. This guy was in prison on July 3rd, okay? Now, you might be overwhelmed by some of this information, like all this stuff. Sometimes people put more details and they just kind of list them, but we can go into other sources associated with William Violet and check and see what is the one we want. So the way you can check the other sources is just go to sources. And we have a lot of different things here. Do not click the names of the records. That'll just take you to a searchable database. You want to click on the name itself. So open new tab. It'll take you to ancestry.com specifically. And you can see here some of the information we have already seen on Fold 3, right? And then here is what we want. So we had that whole list of imprisonment. Here's the first time he was captured, right? July 3rd, this is outside of Gettysburg. He was imprisoned again, a second time, poor guy, in Fairfax Courthouse, Virginia, which is near Alexandria. And then we have some cool information about him. You can see some of this information in someone's service record, in their service file, which we have to find separately. We already get a preview of what this guy looks like, right? And then you get more information about extra details if they're available, such as imprisonment, if they were treated at a certain hospital, whatever. Now, of course, Fold 3, as we've seen here, doesn't have everything, right? It has this guy's little records, and then it has prisoner of war records, which I think are pretty cool. But if you want more information on him, like his civilian life or stuff outside of the war, the suggested records on the right side are a great place to go, okay? Especially census records. We're going to focus on the grave site one, Find a Grave, because Find a Grave is another record database I love to use. And it's something you also have to keep in mind. You need to check this information. This is user entered, okay? So people like me, people like you are going to put this data in, and we just hope the data is correct. So always double check across other records, like census records. And look, you can see them pop up on the side, these different census records, to really check and see who their family is. A guy whose name is like William Smith, right, or Johnson, there's going to be a lot of records for those guys. And you want to make sure you find the guy you want. Even in a regiment, there could be two guys with the same name, okay? So the Find a Grave, again, is a great resource if you want more information on family, especially if you want to go see their grave, right? You can see where they are. Now, something that I want to make clear is the stages of this research in Gettysburg. Because right now, what you've been seeing in this vlog is me acquiring all the data, right? The raw data. But then what is it going to be? And luckily, when I reached out to this institution, I had a clear path and vision for what I thought would be a great avenue or a way to display it, right? The first thing was I knew this would be a great lecture because that museum in particular does a lot of lecture series. They have Friday lectures, they have anniversary lectures around the Battle of Gettysburg, they do Zoom ones. So I was going to tap into what was already established. So the fact that this is becoming a lecture, it gives me a vision for how to transform this raw data later on. So I'm going through Fold 3. I'm going to go through the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion, Mishwar, it's kind of acronymed at, to find more people, because I know right off the bat, this research is not exhaustive. There are going to be a couple hundred soldiers I'm just not going to come across. I cannot list all of the soldiers, of course, who fought at Gettysburg, who got sent down to Alexandria. There are going to be some people that we miss. And as historians, that's okay to admit. Unless it's a confined list of people that we know for sure, right? People who fought in a regiment, or people who, were the number of people from a certain town who fought. It's okay to admit we just don't know everything. And that brings a level of honesty and authenticity to your work. You don't want to come off as like a charlatan, right? You want to come off like you know more than you do. But anyways, I'm going to gather as much data as I can humanly find. And I'm going to say in my lecture that, look, this is ongoing. It's okay that your work isn't complete. It actually is very enticing to learn, wow, there's more out there that we can find. Something that I do with a lot of my other lecture topics is the last slide, the final slide of my PowerPoint, is further research. More things I'm personally interested in looking at, more things that I would love to explore. And it also gives people food for thought, and it also gives people more of an interest in your work. So maybe there's someone in the audience who says, you know what, I really want you to find that further information. I would love for you to continue with this. Let's talk about that. What can that look like for you? So research gaps and extra stuff you haven't finished yet are just fun ways of saying, hey, I have more research I could do, more lectures I can give. Maybe this becomes an article. Maybe that's my project next year. I could finally look at that further research section. So I'm hoping that in March, this coming month, in 2026, I can start compiling my raw data. I'm going to make it a little thematic. Of course, with it being a lecture, it's outlined, right? You have the raw data. It gives me a sense of what I'm working with. Normally, I make a lecture outline before I even do the research. I think about what I'm looking for. But with this, I wasn't sure what I would find. So I went digging first, digging in the records. And now I'm going to go ahead and make the lecture and kind of synthesize all the data. And I'm going to mention there's a couple different things I want to do with this research too. I want to talk about, of course, transportation off the battlefield, statistics, because with this raw data being on an Excel spreadsheet, I'm able to then see how many were wounded versus imprisoned, how many were treated in Alexandria versus how many were mustered out or discharged. So for me, if I'm just working with raw data first, and then I go in to outline my lecture, I see then what topics can I discuss. Now, what's cool about this starting off as a lecture is it can also transform into other things. I can make this a journal article. I can make this an exhibit later on. And this data, even if it's not being presented or it's not on display currently, it can still sit in my arsenal. So when I think about maybe in a couple years from now, wow, I want to go back to researching Gettysburg, let's pull the stuff I've done before. Maybe that's when I go into the further research section. Or maybe I have a client or a group interested in my talks who would want me to create like a brand new lecture, or they're requesting a topic. I can go back into the list of things I've gathered. So even if you do research, you use it for one thing and never again, don't write it off. Put it in a box and keep it safe, because you never know if you're going to need it again. So I'm hoping that this data, right, it's an Excel spreadsheet. I can still use it from time to time. It's still going to be very useful. I've also been able to identify soldiers who I think are really fascinating, and I want to write about them even more. There's some soldiers who was like, I saw like a veterinary surgeon in there. I saw people who were born in Alexandria, and I'm like, oh, maybe they're tied to some family I'm aware of because I researched this town. Of course, there are people I found who survived like 5 major battles, and I'm like, whoa, you're like resilient and a Superman, right? So some of the people that I'm researching, they can have a whole article or lecture on their own. So think of doing massive projects like this as finding mini projects as well. Exploit your own research and pull as much as you can out of it. Now, I also want to show you guys a couple of the books that I'm using for this research. It's not just all online. And I did find a couple of books that would be extremely helpful in understanding the situation at Gettysburg, because I don't live there. I'm not going to call myself an expert on Gettysburg, by no means, but I'm familiar with the battle, and as historians, we're still constantly learning. So no issue if you have to study a bit while you're doing your research. So I got Barbara Franco's Gettysburg Surgeons. So it's talking about, of course, the people who were treating the soldiers. It would be helpful because a lot of surgeons who treat battle injuries in a field hospital or really in the aftermath of battle, a lot of them are regimental surgeons and they're going to travel with their regiment. So I'm curious to see if any of these guys made it down to Alexandria. This battle was in July of 1863, and many surgeons who I've looked at in Alexandria came off the battlefield, transferred to some administrative role, or honestly, and I don't blame them, wanted to get a little away from danger. So I'm curious to see if there's any connections between some Gettysburg doctors and Alexandrians. And I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I apologize if I don't, but Michael A. Jesse's The Hospital on Seminary Ridge in the Battle of Gettysburg. So the museum here, the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, is the museum sponsoring my research, and they are an amazing institution. It was a Lutheran seminary that got transformed into, here we go, a prison, hospital, lookout center, triage center, signal corps station. It was like a whole bunch of stuff during that 3-day battle. And so, of course, with partnering with the Seminary Ridge Museum, I'm utilizing their records. And so I wanted to look further at what life was like in the hospital, because a lot of the records I've been able to access have been soldiers who were treated at this particular hospital. So I wanted to see what they got going on. Thank you guys so much for watching this vlog. Subscribe for more independent research content. I got a lot of cool research coming up this year. Thanks for watching. Bye.